If the Antichrist were to arise today and declare himself God, the world would reject him, thank God. But one day the whole world will follow the Antichrist and worship him as God. What must happen between now and then to allow the Antichrist to rise and take over? I'm George Farrar, founder of End Times Guide, and I want to welcome you to the second short video in our 5-video course, Current Trends Anticipating Great Tribulation. The main trend that is preparing the way for the Great Tribulation and the Antichrist is the decline of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism. This video is called Democracy Declines, Authoritarianism Rises Around the World. For 500 years, ever since the Reformation, democracy was rising, century after century. It began in the 16th century when Martin Luther, a Christian theologian, declared Lex Rex, which means the law should be king, not a man. No man should be above the law. This was a new concept in those times, when kings were treated as gods with divine rights. In the 17th century, another Christian theologian, John Locke, declared all men equal because all men came from the same creator. He declared that God gave all men rights to life, health, liberty, and personal property. And the nation of England adopted some of those rights in the first Bill of Rights. But it only gave members of Parliament the right to freedom of speech and free elections. In the 18th century, a group of 55 men, 52 of whom were Christian leaders, started a new nation that gave all those rights to all men, saying, quote, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They wrote the U.S. Constitution, which became a model for the constitutions of many nations since then. Constitutional democracy, guaranteeing human rights, kept rising in the 19th century when European nations revolted against their kings and when former Latin American colonies gained their independence. And constitutional democracy kept rising in the 20th century when former Asian colonies and former African colonies gained their independence. In the middle of the 20th century, the United Nations adopted a universal declaration of human rights. Not many of those nations have really had good records of human rights, not even the US. But most of them had really good constitutions with some form of democracy and more legal rights than ever before in their history. We can say that Christian theologians and Christian leaders gave the world freedom and rights that the world never had before. And now the world in general wants to keep those rights, but take those rights away from Christians. Secular governments are slowly taking away from Christians freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But non-Christians want to keep their freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press. And that's why they aren't ready for the Antichrist, because the Antichrist won't allow those freedoms. But as constitutional democracy declines, authoritarianism is rising. At this time, more than 57% of people worldwide are dissatisfied with democracy. 57%, compared with only 33% in 1995, according to a Cambridge University survey. The survey said that the main reason for the discontent was political polarization. In many nations, the left has moved so far from the right as to leave irreconcilable differences. Democracy can work when the opposing parties have enough common ground to work on, but a divided nation cannot stand. Each newly elected government will try to undo what the previous government did, and as a result, the whole nation will rock back and forth. Each election will have the potential of becoming a revolution. Then the losing side will try to make it impossible for the winning side to govern at all. We see in the US many Democrats spending more time trying to undo the 2016 election than they spend on any other issue. But when God shakes the nations, like he is doing with the coronavirus crisis, some find that they do have more common ground than they thought. They want the economy to survive. But too many others are seeing an opportunity to do away with many rights and freedoms, and an opportunity to give more power to the state. The more God shakes the nations, the more some people will turn to God for help, but the more other people will turn to the state. More shakings will further divide non-Christians from Christians and divide the left from the right. I'm not saying they're the same. I'm saying that we will see increasing political division between left and right, and increasing religious division between non-Christians and Christians. We can expect more shakings to come. Jesus said that when there's an increase of earthquakes and famines and pestilences like COVID-19, he said, that is not yet the end. He said, these are the beginning of birth pangs. Matthew 24, 6-8. The end comes when the Antichrist is revealed. Verse 15. Also 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-4. Until the end comes, we go through birth pangs that will shake the world. That means more birth pangs will come with increasing intensity and frequency. And more people will be shaken from their jobs and their homes and their plans for their lives. Some will turn to God so that we will see a great harvest of souls for Christ. But others will turn to the state. The more power the state has, and the more authority the state has, the more secure they'll feel, even at the expense of giving up many of their rights and freedoms. But nations will fight over that power over the people. Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And who will win? Eventually, the Antichrist. For a few years, his time is short. The devil will give so much supernatural power and authority to the Antichrist that the whole world will be astonished and follow him, saying, who can make war against him? Revelation 13, 2-4. Then the Antichrist will take political authority over the world, and he will take religious authority over the world when he sits in the temple and proclaims himself as God. People will give him power not only out of fear, but out of lust, because he and other world leaders, until he comes, will put bait on the hook that draws people under their power. That bait is the Babylon economy, quote, the great harlot with whom the kings of the earth committed immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. Revelation 17:2. Those people lose many of their freedoms, but they gain the freedom to have all kinds of sex in the Babylon economy. And they will become intoxicated with a powerful delusion and take pleasure in wickedness. 2 Thessalonians 2, 11-12. That's the bait that will make them take the mark. Our next video is called Babylon Economy Lures Men to Take the Mark. You can read more about the topics we just discussed at the End Times Guide website in the links in the video description below. For the next session, please read Revelation 17-18. Thanks for joining this session. Don't miss the next one.